Welcome to The Legal Truth, the podcast created to provide you general legal information about South Carolina law, lawyers, and the legal process. We will answer many of the questions I've been asked during the past 35 years about South Carolina personal injury claims and workers' compensation claims. My name is Dirk Derrick. I'm the founder of the Derrick Law Firm, and I'm your host.
Please see required ethics disclaimers in show notes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Legal Truth Podcast. I'm Pearl Carey, and I'm here today with my co-host, Dirk Derrick. Thanks for being here, Dirk. And today we're here to discuss the truth about motorcycle accidents in South Carolina. So, Dirk, let's start at the beginning. What does someone actually have to do to legally ride a motorcycle in South Carolina?
Well, you have to get your mama's permission, and no, you actually don't have to do that. I always wanted a motorcycle growing up, and my mother said no, so I didn't get one growing up. We had mini bikes, but didn't have the kind you could ride on the road. Motorcycle accidents are a little bit different than car wrecks. You do have to have an endorsement on your driver's license or a motorcycle driver's license by itself in South Carolina. So you have to go get that specific license to be able to have one. You can't just buy a motorcycle and get on the road. So you have to go through that training and that exercise. But other than that, you have to insure it just like a car. You have to put the same 25,000, 50, 25,000 coverage is the minimum limits in South Carolina. So you have to get a special license and you have to insure it before you drive it.
Makes sense. And so does South Carolina have a helmet law regarding motorcycles?
They do. If you're under 21 years of age, you have to wear a helmet. 21 and above is optional. As an attorney who handles these cases all the time, I would say please wear a helmet. If you have a helmet on, I have a better chance of representing you instead of your family. There's some bad injuries happen in motorcycle wrecks, and head injuries are very, very normal in a motorcycle wreck when somebody didn't have a helmet on. Helmet doesn't totally prevent it, but it really is a injury that happens a lot in motorcycle wrecks.
So regarding insurance for a motorcycle, is there anything special or different in terms of how South Carolina handles insurance?
No, it's the same thing. South Carolina, we have minimum limits where you have to put $25,000, let's say liability. If you cause somebody's injury, $25,000 per person, $50,000 per accident, and $25,000 in property damage to the other person if you cause the wreck. Motorcycle insurance requirements are the same as car insurance requirements. You have to carry at least the minimum limits in South Carolina. Liability coverage is the coverage that covers somebody else if you hurt them. In South Carolina, you have to carry $25,000 per person, $50,000 per accident, and $25,000 for property damage in a wreck. That much coverage. In South Carolina, it's mandatory that they will add uninsured motorist coverage on your policy in the amount of your liability coverage. You got to have at least 25, 50, 25. Usually raise it with the limits of your liability coverage. What that covers you for is if someone hits you, hurts you, or hurts a passenger, and they don't have any insurance. In South Carolina, we also have underinsured motorist coverage. That's when somebody has insurance but not enough to pay for your damages. That's underinsured motorist coverage, or UIM coverage. It's not mandatory, but it is mandatory that they make you a meaningful offer of that coverage and give you a chance to buy it. That is a very cheap coverage to buy and a very important coverage to buy, because $25,000, and that's when I say 25, 50, 25, if somebody's driving a vehicle with that coverage and they hit you and your family, you're riding in the car, your wife, your two kids in the back, and they hurt y'all. If they have 25, 50, 25, the minimum limits, the most they got to pay any one person in your car for the bodily injury is $25,000. And that can be eaten up immediately at the emergency room. The most they have to pay your whole family is $50,000. And the most they have to pay for your property damage, your car, your vehicle, is $25,000. So that is really, in today's world, a very low amount of coverage. So I always recommend to my clients, once they come in, go out and buy underinsured motorist coverage. What that does is that gives you coverage that if they hit you at 25, 50, 25, and if you have purchased underinsured motorist coverage, when their insurance runs out, you can apply it to your insurance. And that underinsured motorist coverage, what people find out is if they will increase their value, their limits of their liability coverage, let's say to 250, 500,000 instead of 25, 50,000, you can do the same thing with underinsured motorist coverage. So now if someone hits you, you have $250,000 per person, $500,000 per accident, and $250,000 for property damage and punitive damages. Now, the biggest reason people don't buy that is they just trying to get, they want to spend as little as possible on insurance because it's never going to happen to them. We are all born, I think, with something that, nobody's going to hurt us. We're not be the victim of a wreck. And then when it happens, it's too late to go back and transform your policy for that particular incident. But what people don't understand is the majority of your cost of your insurance is that first 25, 50, 25, because it's a lot on the vehicle, the property damage. And a lot of times, and they think, well, I can't go from 25, 50 to 250, 500. That's 10 times as much. And that would cost me 10 times as much. I can't pay that much on insurance. Well, the truth is, if you go compare insurance companies, a lot of times you can get 10 times the coverage with only 1/10 the increase. So think about it. If you're paying $500 every 6 months for minimum limits, you may be able to get 10 times that coverage and underinsured motorist coverage for $550 every 6 months. And the amount of coverage you have there, it's just unbelievable compared to getting the minimum limits. And in South Carolina, another good thing about it is you can stack the coverage on the different vehicles in your household, which means if I have 250, 500 on the car I'm driving, my wife has a car, my teenage son has a car, if a wreck occurs, I can stack all that coverage for that wreck on the UIM coverage, which means now I got $750,000 per person in addition to the amount of liability of the person who caused my damages. So very cheap. They have to make you an offer of that coverage, underinsured motorist coverage. They have to get you to sign off that you don't want it. And the reason the state makes them do it is because it's such a good deal. They want you to have the opportunity to reject it. And so my opinion, especially, it's across the board with cars too, but if you're driving a motorcycle, please get underinsured motorist coverage, because motorcycle accident victims, the people who are on motorcycles, their damages are very, very often much worse than cars.
Absolutely. So having the proper coverage is of the utmost importance when it comes to riding a motorcycle or driving a motorcycle. Absolutely.
Or you will have a conversation with me or another attorney, and you will say, they only had $25,000 insurance, and my bills are $1 million. Well, that's not fair. I'm telling you, it's not fair. But that conversation goes on way too many times because people do not protect themselves with their insurance coverage.
Absolutely. And so how do the rules for motorcycles differ from the rules or the laws for cars?
It's really the same rules. It's very similar. I think that the one rule I can think that you can't do as a car, you can't ride two cars together down one lane. And the law does allow motorcyclists to ride two by two in the lanes. But other than that, you abide by the same laws. You're responsible for the same safety laws. There's really no difference.
And regarding motorcycles, are there any other rules that riders should generally know about?
Yeah, I mean, one thing different about a motorcycle is they've got to have running headlights that run all the time. From a visibility standpoint, their headlights stay on all the time. It's got to be on day or night just to help people see them.
Absolutely. In your experience, what are the main causes of motorcycle accidents on the road?
Well, going back to the previous question, is people not seeing people on motorcycles. It's the number one reason that people give when there's a motorcycle wreck, I believe, from my experience. And you think about it, if you have blind spots, where you miss an entire car, missing a motorcycle is easier. Now, I do believe motorcycles most of the time make more noise so you can hear them if you have a quiet cab that you're driving. But the main reason people give is, I didn't see them. I do not believe people have the fear of turning in front of a motorcycle like they do turning in front of a Mack truck. They realize a motorcyclist has to slow down or they're going to get the worst end of the deal. And I do believe people will turn in front of a motorcycle faster than they will a large truck or vehicle because they don't fear them as much. And maybe they can't judge the speed of them, but I think that's a problem. I think people will turn in front of motorcycles. They will change lanes in front of motorcycles. I think really, if you're riding a motorcycle on the road, you really got to drive defensively, because unfortunately there's some people who won't respect the fact that you're out there, you're kind of uncovered. So I think some disrespect for motorcycles and thinking that the motorcyclists will drive defensively all the time leads to some wrecks. And I think the third thing I would say is some motorcyclists driving aggressively leads to wrecks just because they can change lanes and go around traffic faster than a car. I mean, they can jump through some small areas, and that goes back to cars not seeing them and not expecting that they don't make lane changes and do things as quickly as they do, I think is a problem. And it may be entirely legal for them to do that, but the driver of the vehicle did not expect it and did not see it. I think the final cause of motorcycle wrecks that's a little different than car wrecks are the road defect cases. Pothole, uneven lanes. There can be some problems on roads that cars kind of can handle and can cause problems with motorcyclists. But the main wrecks we see is inattention, distraction, inability to see motorcyclists, or failure to see a motorcyclist are the main causes.
So, when you actually try one of these motorcycle cases in court, what are the damages issues that come up?
Unfortunately, these wrecks cause catastrophic injuries and death. So we are, from day one, trying to preserve all the evidence so that we can prove the liability, what happened, whether there's any recklessness on the part of the other driver from day one, while we investigate the insurance coverage, the collectability of how much can we collect if the damages requires it, and then how much we can collect if the damages support it, and then we start working up the damages. The damages are the same as a car wreck. You're entitled to medical expenses, both past and future. If you can show that someone's going to have future, that is based upon a reasonable degree of medical certainty, they don't have future medicals. We work up life care plans to show how much those medicals will cost in the future. You also have lost wages, pain and suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, all the same factors if the motorcycle rider survives. If he or she does not survive and it becomes a wrongful death case, the damages are calculated differently. You actually, in a wrongful death case, you have two claims. You have the survival claim, which is medical bills, pain and suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, everything while the motorcyclist survived after the wreck, if he or she survived at all. And then if they pass away, you have a wrongful death case. And that wrongful death damage is the loss, the mental loss, the mental damages and the loss of a family member to the close family members. So you measure it from their loss, not the motorcyclist's loss, if that makes sense. People, they say wrongful death, that you're trying to evaluate someone's life, but it's really not evaluating a life. It's evaluating the damages that loss of life has caused his or her closest family members.
Absolutely. And so previously we kind of touched on this, but how does public perception and bias against motorcycle riders impact a personal injury case?
Before we started doing a bunch of jury research and focus groups, I'd have told you it was more than I have found it to be. You know, my 91-year-old mother believes that if you get on the highway on a motorcycle, you're asking somebody to hit you. I love her, but if I had a motorcycle case, I wouldn't put her on my jury. She just, why would you do that? Why would you drive a motorcycle on the highway? But overall, what we have found, and there's people like that. There's people who think that you're kind of assuming the risk when you get on road with a motorcycle. But it's not as many people as I thought it was going to be before I started doing the jury research. Most people understand you have the right to be there. Most people understand that you have the same rights and they're not going to punish you for being on a motorcycle. But when we build those cases, we do build in the time to show that you're doing everything right. You were one of those good motorcycle riders who was not driving aggressively, speeding, doing anything out of the ordinary, because that kind of conduct can stigmatize or can bring out some biases on the part of the jury. You know, we have 2 or 3 motorcycle rallies here in Myrtle Beach every year. And so the people who live here deal with them. We drive with them. And so we have driven with motorcycle riders who are obeying the law, going the speed limit, being careful. And we have ridden with motorcyclists who are flying around people, speeding and shooting way ahead. And we've seen both types of motorcycle riders. And so when we're building a case, we really want to build it to put you in the category of the people that the jury has seen who are obeying the law while they're on a motorcycle, if that makes sense. We're trying to put you in that camp and keep you out of the other camp.
This kind of plays into my next question. So how does not wearing a helmet impact a personal injury claim, especially considering they're optional over the age of 21 in South Carolina?
Same thing. There's going to be some people to say, if you didn't wear a helmet, even though the law says you don't have to, that you should have. And that's just, they're going to say it. If you end up with a TBI and you don't have a helmet on, there's going to be a group of people who say that. There's a group of people who say, no, he had a legal right not to wear it, and it's not his fault if it's the other person's fault. And I can't tell you the percentage off the top of my head, but there's people who believe that strongly both ways. It has a good possibility to hold down the damages you can get from anything to do with your head injury, no matter what the law is and no matter what the judge tells them. Jurors, we have found, there's a lot of doing what they want to do, and a lot of confirmation bias where they make up their mind how they undo it and then they justify it with whatever law they want to justify it with. But I would tell you that if you put 12 people in a jury box, some people in that jury room will treat a motorcyclist wearing a helmet different than a motorcyclist not wearing a helmet.
Absolutely. And so how does the comparative fault system in South Carolina work in practice for a motorcycle rider?
It's the same thing as a car. It's comparative negligence in South Carolina. We have the kind of comparative negligence that says the plaintiff can't be more than 50% at fault. How it works is the jury, if an allegation is made that the motorcyclist did something wrong, and it's almost always made by the defense attorney, the jury decides, did the defendant, the person we brought the action against, did they do something negligent? And did it contribute to the plaintiff's injuries? And if they say yes, they look at the plaintiff's conduct and say, did the plaintiff do anything negligent? And did that negligence contribute to the injuries? If they say yes to both sides, then they divide up the responsibility. And they put a percentage on the defendant and a percentage on the plaintiff. If they put no percentage on the plaintiff, if they say the plaintiff didn't do anything wrong, whatever damages they come up with, let's say they came up with $1 million, the plaintiff would be awarded $1 million. if there's coverage, and collectability and insurance coverage are a way to collect that money. You'd get a verdict for $1 million. If they say, well, we think the plaintiff was 10% at fault, they're still supposed to come up with the damages, let's say $1 million, but then they put 10% on the plaintiff, so the judge would reduce that $1 million by 10%, and the plaintiff would be given a verdict for $900,000. If, however, they put more fault on the plaintiff than the defendant, let's say they say the damages are $1 million, but we think the plaintiff is 60% at fault and the defendant is 40% at fault, in South Carolina, because the plaintiff is now more than the defendant, the plaintiff gets nothing. It is not a true comparative state. So if the defendant can show that the motorcyclist was more than 50% at fault, then the verdict would be 0. That is not as good as true comparative. So if the plaintiff is 90% at fault and the defendant is 10% at fault, you're still entitled to 10% of the damages. In North Carolina, however, they have the same law that we had in South Carolina when I got out of law school, back when we rode horses to the courthouse. It's called contributory negligence. If the plaintiff is 1% at fault, he or she gets nothing. So the defendant can be 99% at fault. If the plaintiff's 1% at fault, they get nothing. So our system is a split between true comparative and contributory. We would rather have pure comparative, but if they put 50% on, more than 50% on the motorcyclist, he or she gets nothing.
Gotcha. And so what should a motorcycle rider do and not do directly after a crash or an incident occurs?
If you're injured, get medical treatment. If the doctors tell you to do something, do it. If the doctor tells you to go to these 6 appointments, go to them. From an investigative standpoint, get somebody to investigate your case quickly. You know, with modern technology, there's so many things we can get that if we get involved early on, we can acquire that really helps us prove what happened in a case. Most cars nowadays have black box, and they have data in them where we can see what their speed was, were they speeding up, were they hitting the brakes, what they were doing the last 4 or 5 seconds before the wreck. Very important to prove cases. Also, if we get involved early enough, we can get on the road or the street and look for ring cameras or surveillance cameras to prove what happened. But those things they write over themselves. So if you don't get involved quickly, you can lose that evidence. So from a proving the case, we love to get involved early so we can investigate early. We can put private investigators to go out and talk to eyewitnesses while they still are in the area. In Myrtle Beach area, you know, these people come for 1 week and go back home. So if there's any way we can talk to witnesses while they're down here, it's great that we get locked down the evidence to be able to prove your case later down the road if we need them. So preserve anything you can, get names of witnesses. If anyone said they saw something, get someone to investigate your case as fast as possible. Whether you get us or some other firm, get an attorney involved so they can preserve evidence to help you get medical treatment and then do what your doctors tell you to do. Losing evidence because we don't get involved early in a matter is very disappointing. When we get involved later on and we don't have surveillance and we don't have things that could have been preserved, it's frustrating because we know if we had it, the case would be so much easier to prove. And when we focus group these cases at night, jurors expect everything to be on videotape. I mean, they say, why didn't we see the surveillance? Why we didn't see that? There's cameras on that road. There's businesses on that road. Why didn't you show us videos and surveillance? And we have to tell them, well, we got involved late and everything was gone. We send people out and try to preserve that when we get hired, but if it's not preserved earlier, you lose it. The second most frustrating thing in trying to help somebody and maximize the recovery is them not doing what their doctor tells them to do. It is a very hard sell to go in front of a jury and say, my client was hurt, they're still suffering from it, they're gonna suffer from this from here on out, or for however long the doctor says they're gonna suffer from it. But then the defense lawyer stands up and say, hey, This person didn't even do what the doctor told him to do. He didn't even try to get help. They want you to pay him for pain and suffering. The doctor told him to go to 8 appointments and he went to 2. He didn't even try to help himself. How bad was he injured if he didn't do what the doctor told him to do? So not doing what your doctors tell you to do, missing appointments, those things just hurt your case badly. And a lot of people have good excuses. A lot of people say, I got to go to work. I can't take a half a day off twice a week for 12 weeks to go get this treatment. And I understand that's life, but I also understand that it definitely hurts people's cases, because that's not a hard sell for the defense to put on the plaintiff. And the plaintiffs often think they can come in and say, I'll explain myself. But there will be pro-defense jurors most of the time on a jury. And all they're looking for is something to hang their hat on to get a defense verdict or hold down the verdict. There's people who just don't want to give awards. And any of those things that the plaintiff does is just, that's what they're going to latch onto. And that's what we see them over and over and over in the jury research room going, y'all, he didn't go to the doctor. Y'all, he didn't do what the doctor told him to do. And they just hold the verdict down.
Absolutely. So it's just really important, if a motorcycle rider is to get in a wreck, that they get help immediately and that they listen to their doctors. Dirk, do you have any final comments about motorcycle accidents in South Carolina to add?
The only thing I would add is, there's a 3-year statute of limitations in motor vehicle accidents in South Carolina. You got 3 years to bring the case, but you don't want to wait 3 years. Like I said, preservation of evidence, preservation of medical proof, all that stuff needs to be attacked earlier. You can have a situation where somebody, and I'm going to tell you, most times somebody calls me at 2.5 years or 2 years and 9 months after an incident. They got to have a good excuse why they've waited so long, or we're not going to get involved in it, because we can't build the case. It's just, you can't go back 2.5 years and you just lose so much evidence. So it's very important to get involved earlier, but you do have a 3-year statute of limitation. And the final thing I'll say, the same thing I've talked about earlier. In motorcycle cases, the biggest problem we see is there's not enough insurance coverage. People get hurt badly, they get killed, and then because they did not have underinsured motorist coverage in a high enough limits, or didn't have any at all, there's no money to cover their damages. And in the event of a wrongful death, there's no money to leave for their family to help them pay for things that person would have paid for had they been alive. Call the Derrick Law Firm, ask to speak to me if you want to know how much coverage to get. But please, if you don't ride a motorcycle, you really need to have enough insurance coverage that if somebody does hit you and doesn't see you, that your family's covered and they don't pay for that for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. That would be a sad situation.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Dirk, for joining me today on another episode of the Legal Truth Podcast. And to our listeners, please tune in the next few weeks for another episode, and we hope to see you in the next one.
Thank you for joining us on the Legal Truth Podcast. If you have questions that you would like answered on a future episode, please send them to thelegaltruth@derricklawfirm.com. If you would like to speak to us directly, call us at 843-248-7486. If you find the podcast valuable, please leave us a 5-star review and share the legal truth with your neighbor, friend, or family member who is seeking reliable information about a South Carolina personal injury or workers' compensation claim. Dirk J. Derrick of the Derrick Law Firm Injury Lawyers is responsible for the production of this podcast, located at 901 North Main Street, Conway, South Carolina. Derrick Law Firm Injury Lawyers has included the information on this podcast as a service to the general public. Use of this podcast and any related materials does not in any manner constitute an attorney-client relationship between Derrick Law Firm Injury Lawyers and the user. While the information on this podcast is about legal issues, it is not intended as legal advice and should not be used as a substitute for competent legal advice from a licensed professional attorney in your particular state. Anyone seeking specific legal advice or assistance should retain an attorney. Any prior results mentioned do not guarantee a similar outcome. The content reflects the personal views and opinions of the participants in the podcast and are not intended as endorsements of any views or products. This podcast could contain inaccuracies. The information contained in this podcast does not constitute legal advice and is not guaranteed to be correct, complete, or up to date as laws continue to change. In this podcast, you will hear information about focus groups. Please note that not all of the firm's cases are presented to a focus group. Additionally, when speaking about juries or jurors in relation to a focus group, we are speaking of focus group participants and not actual trial juries or jurors.